Hello there! So those of you who know me well know that I'm a bit of a Star Trek fan and general sci-fi fan. I also like making models when I have the time. So I thought today I would show you the different space models, sci-fi models that I've made over the years, starting with my collection of Star Trek models. Now these are a couple of shuttlecraft I made from papercraft kits that I found on the internet. You just print them up and cut them out and make them. So these, to begin with, are what's known as micro machines. I still got these after goodness knows how many years. Little replicas. You can see this is the original Enterprise from the first Star Trek. This one is, I was in the process of repainting this one last time I had it. So I can't remember what that originally looked like. But here you go, here's one that was largely untouched. That's the EXCELSIOR. It's taken a little bit of a beating over the years, but these were kind of my favourite toys, as it were, when I was a kid. Oh, and of course, here is the Enterprise from the Star Trek The Next Generation. Beautiful ship, this one. Absolutely love this. This was my favourite one for the years and years. I lost it for ages because it's so small, it was so easy to... Look how small it is. There it is in my hand. So tiny. Anyway, so after a while I began to get dissatisfied with these because they only made these types of ships. They didn't make all of my other favourite ones from the sort of more recent series. So I also wanted to experiment a little bit with my own designs. So here we are. My first attempts at making little Starship, spaceship models of my own were pretty limited really, because I didn't have an awful lot of skills. I didn't really know what I was doing with painting. So here's the very first one I ever made. This one, if I remember correctly, it must be about 15 years old now, because I started making these when I was aged around 9 or 10, I'm guessing. It's painted with a felt pen, and it's made out of strips of cardboard and little pieces of very, very small cut up balsa wood, which I then fashioned into windows and decks. So it's supposed to be a kind of, my dad used to call these coffin-shaped ships, even though that's the comparison I didn't really think of. I just thought they were kind of cool and sleek looking. I was pleased enough that I'd made them on my own. Years later I went back to see if I could do the same design, but much neater. This is one I came up with then. So a little later on I started to progress onto slightly more complicated designs, like this one that's the Enterprise, supposed to look like the Enterprise from the Next Generation movies. Star Trek First Contact and, let me see, Nemesis and Insurrection, I think, are the 3 or 4 that they did with this ship. It's fairly basic. I basically did it with layered cardboard and then painted over the top of that. They're very fragile though. See, these little wing, the warp nacelles would get a little bit wobbly after a while, so... But I was happy enough with these at the time. Here's another one I tried. This one's unfortunately taken a fairly serious beating and has lost its engine, so it's adrift in space at the moment. But you can see this one, oh god, get it in focus. There we go. You can see I did this one by layering up bits of cardboard to create the shape of the main hull. So I didn't think I was terribly successful with the painting, so I decided instead to start like just doing them with layered cardboard and then felt pen and just detailing them that way. So this is one that's just a sort of original design. Looks a bit like various different Star Trek ships I've seen. I just made this design up out of nowhere. This one again, I think it's about 10 to 13 years old maybe. Still survives. It's a bit wobbly on the cardboard though. That's one of the things that I fixed later by making more rigid models. Here's another one. This one I think was supposed to be a kind of Enterprise C sort of looking one, a bit more traditional looking one, and this one was just a wacky design. So I decided to try with a warp engine underneath and 2 on the top, and then I seem to remember I dipped this one in paint by accident. Oh yeah, so you see this little discoloured bit at the top, but I'd managed to, I decided, you know what, that one's taken some battle damage, so I'll just pretend that's battle damage. There we go. So after that, I started to get a bit bored of Star Trek ships because I found them a bit too hard. They didn't usually stay together terribly well. So I decided to also, and my brother and I also at the same time got this game, TACHYON the Fringe, which is fantastic. It's a kind of ship-to-ship combat sci-fi shoot 'em up arcade style game. It was great fun, and the graphics were okay for its time. They still hold up now, I think, but it was the first time they started making big space stations, huge ships that you could fly around in a smaller ship. Now here are two of the fighter ships from that game. Firstly, I think this one was called the Orion. Yeah, that's right, this one was called the Orion. It's got this kind of interesting wing that sticks out the front with a gun on it. Don't know why. It looks cool, but I don't see why you'd ever build a spaceship that looked like that. Again, this is layered cardboard with, I think, shiny felt gel pen. And this one was my favourite. This one's the Pegasus. Yeah, this one's the Pegasus. And this one belongs to one of the warring factions in the game called the GALSPAN. That was great fun. This was pretty fun to make as well, and it was just small enough that it fit in my pocket. So it was great fun to do. Now there are also loads of big capital ships in the game which you didn't get to fly, didn't get to actually use them as drivable vehicles, but they were kind of there in the background being big scenery set pieces, and they were so cool you could fly around them and see what they look like from all different angles. So here's one. This one was a large cruiser in the game. Yeah, it had little docking bays in the side here you could fly into. So, you know, one of those ships I showed you earlier could actually fly into that. That gives you a sense of how big this one was in the game. So this one I had fun. This is the first time I started working with wood. This one's balsa wood and cardboard for the little wing bits at the back. This one was a real beast to do. Really hard. Lots of different pieces. This one is a destroyer in the game. Although I also made it out of quite weak wood, so it's sort of had bits peeling away over the years. But I'm still really pleased with it because it looks exactly like the one in the game. I took really detailed drawings and made a model of it. Yeah, and sometimes there would be massive battles with 4 or 5 of these ships all in space at the same time. You'd be fighting amongst them. It's great fun. This one is in one of the best missions of the game, actually. You have to disable the ship because there's a crazy captain on board who wants to hijack the ship and steal it. So you have to disable the ship before he can get away. And you do that by knocking out like the engines, which are right there. Anyway, so after that I started to get back into the Star Trek a little bit when I saw an episode of Voyager called Equinox, and it featured this ship. This is a plastic model I acquired some years later, but I had pictures of this one to go off, and so I made my own model of it. Here, this is using my cardboard technique. This is when I really started to get a lot better at painting by doing those other models, so I decided to try and paint this one entirely grey and then do my own windows, the little white and grey dots on there, and my own detailing using, I think I used like black ink pen, which eventually dried once I put a little bit of varnish on. And then I did another one of my own design here. This one sort of has its own little torpedo launcher on the back. Here's one I made by combining different elements of different ships. This one is an extra long one for some reason, but it looks a bit like an Excelsior type thing, but it's got the pylons are swept back, so the engines are much further back than they would ordinarily be. But this one ends up looking really sleek and cool. They're also so small. Look at that! I can't believe I worked on things this small. Then maybe my fingers were smaller. And this one I painted as well to look like this. Now after that, this is around 2003, I only made a couple more in the technique of layering up cardboard. Here is a second attempt I made at making the Enterprise from First Contact, and this one I was much more pleased with. Now of course when you're using cardboard of different thicknesses, it's easier to get the more subtle surface features. Like for example, these slightly raised bits underneath were made by tearing cardboard in half and making an extra layer that way. This hull is much more sleek. You can't quite see the layers on it. You can almost make out the layers on the top of the hull here, top of the saucer section, but I think from a distance the profile of the ship looks just about right. I absolutely loved this one from First Contact. I thought it was the coolest looking ship. Meow. Now this one was the last one I tried doing with layered up cardboard, and I realised I'd really reached the end of what I could do with that technique. This is I Enterprise from yesterday's Enterprise. This is the Enterprise C, but it's got a different name. I think this one's the Excalibur. Now, do you see the painting here took me absolutely ages. Building the ship didn't take me too long, but you see these concentric circles I masked off with different sizes of masking tape. The masking tape had to be cut with a pair of compasses. It was a nightmare to do. I seem to remember I had to build it in 2 bits and then stick it back together again. I think it looks pretty good in the end. For that, I started to try and make models using combinations of balsa wood to do the more sleek parts and cardboard to do the thinnest bits. So for example, this one was the first one I built using mostly wood, and then I painted the whole thing. You know, again, I was sort of semi-satisfied with that one. Also, I didn't know that the design was that interesting, really. Those of you out there who know your movies, your Star Trek movies, will know that this one is the Enterprise B from Star Trek Generations. This one was pretty hard to do, but I'm pretty satisfied with it because it was the most complicated sort of shape of ship that I tried to do using this technique of both wood and cardboard. Because it had lots of little fins, like there's fins on the engines, there's fins on the back. Oh god, they were hard to do. And like there's multi-layered, again this kind of suits the multi-layered design. This is all multi-layered cardboard, and then the hull underneath was shaped balsa wood. And finally, the famous Enterprise from the original series movies. This is the Enterprise, the Enterprise A. Now I didn't finish this one for whatever reason, but I was pretty satisfied with the shape of it. I think it looks just about right. Maybe the saucer is a bit too big, and the engines are maybe a little too short. But I liked it. I was happy with this one, but I didn't get around to finishing it because this is when I started to get busy, really busy with early GCSE work. Now this is the first one that I did pretty much entirely out of wood. The only bits that are cardboard on this are, let me see, the little pylons there, and I think that's it actually. Everything else was layers of shaped balsa wood. Now this I had a huge amount of fun doing, because it's so sturdy. To this day, it's probably the sturdiest one that I made. This is my own design. This one is supposed to be Excelsior B, which I don't think is canon, but somebody did a computer mesh of it, and I thought, you know, that's a really good design, so I'll do a model of that. I really liked this one. Okay, here's another plastic model. This one was one of the most amazing looking ships I ever saw. It's like this arrowhead looking thing. This is a plastic model I acquired again some years afterwards. But yeah, this is the Prometheus, and the cool thing about this one is that it could split into 3 bits. There was this piece, this sort of arrowhead piece came off the top, these 2 split down the middle there and came apart, and so there were three parts to this ship. And I wanted, obviously this one doesn't come apart, but I was desperate. I really wanted one that came into 3 bits like that. This is my version of the Prometheus. This one took ages because it was such a weird design and so difficult to get the 3 bits to really fit together properly. So there it is as a complete whole. Now the first bit is pretty easy to get off. That just comes apart like that, and you see it flies away. The idea of this one is that it's a ship that could become 3 ships. So when when you're having a battle and you're having a particularly hairy moment, you can unhairy yourself by splitting into 3 ships, and having a battle from 3 different vectors. There we go, and there's part A and part B. So this splits into 2 like that as well. And then in the middle, that's just a track pin from actually a model railway track pin. Those fit together like that. Engines on this, well, believe it or not, and this is part of the reason this one took so long, is that this one has its own hinged warp nacelle on the top. Yeah, I know, it was way too complicated and insane, but look at that. That looks pretty cool, don't you think? Just on its own it looks pretty good, but then you just slowly, there you go, it retracts like that, and then you can put it back together. Oh god, that was a lot of work. Here we are. Here are the final ones. These are the last ones I ever made. These are made of cardboard, and they're slightly bent to make a slightly sleeker shape. They've got layered cardboard going up the back to make those, and then the thing that wraps around the cells here, that's a one cardboard piece that just wrapped around like that. This one might be my favourite. This one is the USS Ronin. It's got these cool underslung engines at the back. Looks pretty cool from all angles, I think. You can imagine this one zooming around and looking beautiful next to some big planets or nebula or something. So here we go. This is the very last one I ever made, and I think probably the best one I made. This one is, I think I originally wanted to call this Excalibur, but then I realised I already had one called Excalibur. So there's the template I made for it. You can see I plotted with a pair of compasses the shape of the saucer and smoothed it out. This one is actually the Enterprise G, I think. You can see how much time I spent getting that detail on the top right, particularly the windows and so on. And then the underneath has the little light deflector thing at the front. So yeah, that's been my Star Trek ships. Hope you enjoyed seeing them. Unfortunately, I don't think I have time to make them anymore. But I really had fun while I did them, and I'll keep these forever. See you next time.